everyone, this is People in Power and I'm Summer El-Shahat. On today's programme, war crimes in Sri Lanka. In May 2009, Sri Lanka's decades-long civil war with the Tamil Tigers, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, came to a bloody close after government forces launched a massive offensive. What exactly happened during the last days of the battle is still the subject of fierce debate. But it's clear that as the rebel perimeter shrank, around 1/3 civilians were trapped between the two armies, and tens of thousands were killed. The government says the LTTE were using civilians as human shields. Tamil exiles say the deaths were the result of indiscriminate shelling by the Sri Lankan army. Each has accused the other of atrocities. The LTTE was crushed in the offensive, most of its leaders killed, and thousands were captured and imprisoned. But the Sri Lankan government has so far refused to agree to an independent international war crimes investigation. Now, a UN panel has found that the allegations against both sides are credible. It says they may have committed serious violations of humanitarian law. As Juliana Rufus and Dom Rotheroe have been finding out, unless and until the truth is established, a final reconciliation in Sri Lanka may prove impossible. Some of the images in their film are deeply disturbing.
When Sri Lanka's President Mahinda Rajapaksa visited the UK last December, he was greeted by protests outside his hotel. Many in the Tamil diaspora accused the Sri Lankan government of committing war crimes during the final stages of their conflict with the Tamil Tigers.
My people, everything dead. My mom, my dad, small people, everything dead. This is arrest him. This is England is police. Arrest him.
President Rajapaksa's visit was cut short when activists sought to arrest a top general in his entourage. The diaspora continues to distribute images like these to spur international demands for a war crimes investigation. These are dead female Tamil tigers, believed to be filmed by a Sri Lankan soldier. Yet last year, at a parade celebrating the end of the war, the president praised the conduct of his troops. The war for an independent Tamil homeland erupted in 1983 because the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, or LTTE, felt they were being treated as second-class citizens by the Sinhalese majority. Whether the government can now win the peace will depend on how it deals with what really happened during the final months of the war.
I'm sure you've seen this morning's newspaper, which says that a resolution was passed by the US Senate calling on the Sri Lankan government to establish an independent international accountability mechanism to look into reports of war crimes.
You know, they are undermining the sovereignty of our country. Now we have to put this past behind, and you know, if we start talking about all these atrocities done by, start investigations, and we are atrocities done by the LTT and killings and all these things. It's useless. Now we have to move forward.
Yet some in the military are anxious that 2 years after the fighting finished, the Tamils are winning the media war. They are keen to show us captured LTT weapons to prove this was no ordinary insurgency.
They had the access to sophisticated arms and ammunition, weapon systems, not only the ground forces. They had a naval wing.
That's a submarine.
Yes. And LTT was developed into a huge military organization. For close to 30 years, they occupied certain areas. They controlled major areas in the north and the east.
The army says the only way to end the war was with a major offensive. But as a result, hundreds of thousands of Tamils in the northern Vani region were trapped between the warring sides. It is the question of what really happened to these civilians, which refuses to go away. Human Rights Watch has been documenting abuses by both sides for many years.
The government said from day one, when it began its offensive, that it would take all possible precautions to protect civilians, and in effect, it never did. It used a scorched earth policy, and we began to see that in January 2009.
The Sri Lankan government says that in this last stage of the war, there were 1,500 civilian deaths. The UN estimates at least 5 times that, and others put the death toll as high as 40,000. Establishing an accurate figure has proved impossible, because even today the government tightly restricts access to the Vani.
They don't want people to interview in the area where the final assault occurred, and they're not allowing NGOs or humanitarian organizations full and free access. They say they are. They say everything's normal, but it's not.
But under military escort, the government has promised us unique access. They want to show us that Tamils in the Vani are moving on. We want to find out how Tamils are coping with the legacy of this violent conflict. Our first stop is Kilinochchi, the Tigers' former capital. It was the fall of this town in January 2009 that was the beginning of the end for the LTTE.
The people of Kilinochchi were amongst the first in the northeast to leave when the government army was advancing, and now they're amongst the first to have returned.
This feels like a town regenerating itself, but the constant presence of our military escort prevents any real access to the people who live here. Instead, we film the scars of war. The destruction of this huge water tower was the Tigers' most famous act of sabotage during their retreat. But it is the thousands of landmines they laid behind them that are now the army's biggest headache.
And takes a long process. Generally, the manual deminer can perform up to 10 square meters per day.
So basically what that means is that every inch of this land in front of us has been manually examined.
Yes.
The scale of reconstruction necessary in the Vani is huge.
Where are we now?
This is the main railway track to Jaffna.
But there are no railway tracks.
Yeah, they have taken it to prepare bunkers.
So you have to construct an entirely new railway line.
Yes.
The army is keen to impress on us that reconstruction is being done with local consultation. But it is clear who is in charge. Our request that we meet a couple of business people by ourselves turns into something else altogether.
Well, firstly, good morning. And we mentioned when we cleared our presence here with the military that we wanted to meet some people in the business community. And we had no idea that there would be such a huge turnout. So thank you very much for coming.
The fact that the army plays such an important role in the reconstruction worries Sri Lankan rights campaigners like Dr. Saravana Muthu.
I've heard people say things look better, but they feel worse. Any talk about civil and political rights is seen as irrelevant at best and subversive at worst. So the argument is the government defeated terrorism with a single-mindedness of purpose. Now it will do likewise with economic development. No questions asked. You join the bandwagon and you proceed.
We get our own taste of how tight the authorities' control can be when we try to interview one of the local Tamil MPs, Shivanyanam Sridharan. Even at a school sports event, the military is eavesdropping. And when we try to meet him at his office, our army escort intervenes to stop us.
Meeting with somebody who's a local MP.
Am I speaking to the Major General? So basically you're saying in the Kilinochchi area, we can only film things that have been pre-arranged with the Ministry of Defense. I mean, that feels like you're censoring the local MP.
I mean, is he not free to talk to anybody who wants to talk to him? It's a big no to interviewing Sridharan. With our military escort, we head east from Kilinochchi. We're retracing the route of the advancing army as the Tigers retreated in 2009. The scores of military bases we pass explain Tamil reports that they feel under occupation. This is the crossing point between Kilinochchi and Mullaitivu district. We're just being handed over from one team of military to the next, and we're the first international TV crew that's been allowed to film in this area. We are entering the heart of the war zone. Uncleared landmines mean that civilians have not yet been allowed to return, and the only signs of life, apart from the military, are abandoned herds of cattle. But in 2009, these roads were jammed with refugees, as almost the entire population of the Vani fled the army's offensive. At the time, the government claimed there were only 70,000 civilians here, but later over 300,000 turned up in displacement camps. This is the website of the Sri Lankan Defence Ministry, and what you can see here on the map is the advancing Sri Lankan army, the blue arrows, and also the shrinking Tamil Tiger territory here in red. What you don't see is the wave of civilians being pushed towards the coast. Trapped between the army and the Tigers, these civilians were under constant attack. Ramanan was part of the mass exodus, working for an aid group linked to the Tigers.
ஒவ்வொரு செகண்டும் அங்கே மக்கள் செத்து கொண்டாண்டிருந்தேன். அந்த எங்களுக்கு என்ன நடக்கும், எப்படி நாங்கள் போனோம். நான் தச்சலா வெளியில் போனால் என் முகத்தை பார்க்கும் வரைக்கும் என் மனைவி தெரியாது. நான் வர மாட்டேன்.
Ramanan says even today he can't reveal his identity for fear of government reprisals against his family.
They are using the cluster bombs. They are divided as 30 pieces. Then everything's blast.
அதென்றால் எப்படி கண்ணால பார்க்க இல்லாத நிலைமையாகும். அப்படி விழுந்து விழுந்து கிடக்க நாங்கள் அப்படி கடந்து இப்படி குனிஞ்சு தான் வந்தோம். இஞ்சால வரும் அப்படி அது கூட ரவுண்ட்ஸ் வரும். அப்போ இப்படி தவண்டும் சில உலையில வந்திருக்கிறோம். ஒரு பொடியை நொண்டு கிடக்குற அக்கா எங்கேயும் கொண்டு போங்கன்னு சொல்ல, அப்போ நான் எங்கட தம்பி மாதிரி கிடக்குன்னு சொல்ல, அப்போ அப்படி வரே இல்லாது. அப்போ நாங்கள் தூக்கி கொண்டு போனா நாங்கள் 2 பேரும் தூக்கே இல்லாது.
The government announced sequentially that there would be no fire zones, so people retreated to places where they thought they would be safe. Civilians had every reason to think that if they went to these places, they would not be attacked, but they were consistently attacked.
We reach Putukuri-Rupu, where one of the most hotly disputed incidents of the offensive took place, the army shelling of this hospital.
This is Putukuri-Rupu Hospital, so it is damaged.
How do you actually see what caused the damage?
It's damage cause of some the small arms and some shelling also.
But when the shelling took place, there were still civilians in the hospital.
That I cannot be assured. I cannot say the civilians were here or not at the time of the shelling. I don't think.
But these images tell their own story. Under international law, attacking a hospital is a war crime.
We have not bombed any hospital, and remember, there is no cases of incidents to prove that there were casualties in any hospital. So this is why these are just, the propaganda used by the LTTE.
Yet the shelling has been verified by members of the International Red Cross who were present at the time. And until the government allows an independent inquiry into this and other such incidents, the accusations and the denials will persist. By April, the Tigers and 300,000 refugees had been driven onto a tiny strip of land between the Nandivaka lagoon and the ocean. Colonel Senarat Yapa was one of the army's commanders. He takes us to the bank of the lagoon that separated his forces from the site of the Tigers' last stand. My understanding is that we're the first journalists who've actually been allowed to see this area. That side
is still entirely closed off?
Because it is not cleared, I think. Still the mine, demining is happening, and I think it's risk to go there until proper clearing is taking place.
Because it's given so much rise to speculations about mass graves that are being covered up.
Those are rumors only.
But so far, nobody is allowed in there. Nobody. Any international observers?
No.
Although part of the coastal strip was designated as a no-fire zone, survivors describe constant shelling.
பார்த்தா டென்ட் மக்கள் குடியிருப்புன்றது டென்ட். அப்போ நான்லாம் பார்த்துட்டு நான் வெட்டியிலிட்டு பார்க்குறேன், ஒரு டென்ட்டுக்கு மேலே செல் விழுந்து உடுப்பு துணி ட்ரெஸ்ஸஸ் பறக்கிற மாதிரி இருந்துச்சு. எனக்கு பறக்குது. பேருந்து நான் பார்த்து உண்மையாக பறந்தது உடுப்பு இல்லை, ஆக்கள், உண்மையான மனிதர்கள்.
The army says it was in an impossible situation, claiming that these images show LTT artillery firing from within the no-fire zone, with no regard for the safety of the civilians there. The military takes us to meet a group of Tamil survivors who tell of crimes like forcible recruitment by the increasingly desperate Tigers.
இந்த பாருங்கம்மா, இந்த கையை முறிச்சு போட்டு என் மகன் இந்த இருக்கிறார், கண்ணும் தெரியா காதும் தெரியும், காப்பரிச்சது என்டிடி குடிச்சது போன அப்புறம் தம்பி மகனுக்கு செல்ல என்னோட கணவரை இயக்கம் தான் சுட்டது, சுட்டி சேர்த்தது. இப்போ பிள்ளை தடுப்பில் இருக்குது, எனக்கு ஏலாது. என்ன நிலைமையை பாருங்க, என் பிள்ளை வேலையும் பாதிக்கப்பட்டு நான் இந்த ஆலையும் பாதிக்கப்பட்டிருக்கிறேன்.
Others don't know which side fired the guns that killed their loved ones.
அதே நேரம் இஞ்ச தேலை அடிக்க அங்கே தேலை அடிக்க ரெண்டு பக்கம் தலையும் அடி விழுகுது. அப்போ தலை நிமித்தையில் அது ஒரு கிடங்குக்குள்ளாம் படுத்திருந்து நாங்கள் பிள்ளை சொல்லிச்சு, அம்மா ஓடிச்சிக்கிறேன் சாகுறது, இதில் படுப்பும் வராங்கள்னு சொல்லி படுத்திருந்திருந்தான் நடந்தது இவ்வளவு. அந்த கடவுள் உண்மையிலே இருந்தாலும் அதை என் பிள்ளையை பாதுகாத்திருக்கலாம், காயப்பட நேரம் தான் ஒருத்தர் வந்து தூக்கி இருக்கலாம்.
I mean, the LTTE bears, I think, the most responsibility for what happened to the civilians in the end, because they held them as hostages. They used them as human shields. The leadership never showed any real concern for the fate of civilians when the final assault began by the government.
For the Tigers, the Tamil refugees had become the last barrier between them and annihilation. The army gives us this footage, recorded by one of its aerial observation drones. They say it shows LTT fighters shooting into the sand to stop civilians trying to make a break for freedom.
அவங்க சொல்றாங்க என்னடா ராணுவம் சுடையில ராணுவம் வந்து எங்களை அழைச்சி உள்ள கிடக்க போனால் அவங்க சொல்றாங்க.
Nevertheless, thousands braved the waters to escape. Many drowned along the way. In the end, it was Colonel Senarat Yapa's brigade which fought its way across the lagoon and captured a vital causeway. Now the refugees had an escape route.
Was the accomplishment of our mission. Prime aim was to rescue civilians, and when they were coming, actually we were happy and really happy about that.
எல்லாம் முடிஞ்சது. அங்கே எல்லாரும் சரி, எல்டிடி லீடர்ஸ் சரி, அவையில் சரி, இவையில் சரி, இதுக்கு வந்து எல்டிடியோட சம்மந்தப்பட்ட ஆக்கள் இருந்தால் எழும்பி தனியாக வாங்கோ அப்படின்னு சொல்லி. அப்போ என்ன குறைகளுக்கு என்ன மனசையும் கொஞ்சம் முழுபட்டு வந்து பிள்ளைகளாம் அப்பா அப்பான்னு கத்துதுகள். அதுதான் நான் என்னோடய மனைவி பிள்ளைகளை பார்த்த கடைசி நேரம். எங்களுக்கு முன்னால் ஒரு ஆளை சுட்டவங்க, நீங்கள் எங்களுக்கு ஒத்துழைக்காட்டி தான் உங்களுக்கு நடக்குமெண்டு.
As this footage shows, Ramanand's experience was not an isolated one. It is these images, above all, that have galvanized the demand for a war crimes investigation.
There is video footage which shows soldiers, government soldiers, executing what appears to be LTT cadres who are there with their hands tied up, and that footage has been authenticated by international experts.
No, you can say international experts. I have international experts who had proved those are manipulated or created video footages, you know. I can create one, you shooting your cameraman and put in the web. That's a simple thing with the technology available today.
The issue here is whether the two sides became the mirror image of each other in trying to win a war. And that's what all these allegations are about. Yeah? And I think that's what the country needs to know in terms of as to whether the end really did justify the means, and as to whether the means have sown the seeds of future conflict.
In the end, it's in an army-run rehabilitation centre that we get our most hopeful glimpse of Sri Lanka's future. Here, former LTT cadres arrested at the end of the war have just finished vocational training and are awaiting release. Santiago left the Tigers 15 years ago. He says he just wants peace.
ஏற்கனவே நாங்கள் நேரடியான அனுபவங்களை பெற்று அதெல்லாம் கசப்பான அனுபவங்கள் யுத்தம் எல்லாம் இனி இந்த யுத்தத்தை வந்து மனதால் நாங்கள் யாரும் விரும்ப இருக்கிறோம் முழு பேற்ற யோசனை வந்து பெரிய நாங்கள் எல்லாரும் விடுதலையாகி வீட்டை போய் எங்கள் குடும்பத்தோடு சேர்ந்து சந்தோஷமாக.
Next door, psychologists teach Sri Lankan soldiers and role play a new and softer approach to interacting with Tamils. And over lunch, it seems the soldiers too are rehabilitated.
අපේ යාළුවෝ නැති වුණා එම අපිට වෛරය තිබුණා මුලින්ම නමුත් අපි ඇවිල්ලා මේ මිනිස්සු එක්ක ගැටෙනකොට මේ මිනිස්සුගේ ප්‍රශ්න අහද්දි මේ මිනිස්සු එක්ක මේ මිනිස්සුන්ගේ තියෙන මානසික හැඟීම් හොයලා බලද්දි අපිට වෛරය නැති වුණා.
When we leave, former LTT cadres and soldiers are engaged in conversation. Simply getting to know one another may be the most important building block for a more peaceful Sri Lanka. We finally managed to make contact with Shivanyanam Sridharan, the MP we were stopped from interviewing.
Hello?
Yes, hello?
It turns out that 7 days after our meeting, there was an attempt to assassinate him.
மாலை 5:30 மணியளவில் எங்களை முந்திச் சென்ற ஒரு வாகனம் இலக்கத்தகடில்லாத வாகனம் வீதியோரமாக நிறுத்தப்பட்டிருந்து அந்த வாகனத்திலே இருந்து மீது முதல் துப்பாக்கி பிரயோகம் செய்யப்பட்டிருக்கிறது. அதன் பின்னர் 2 கைக்குண்டுகள் வீசப்பட்டன. அவற்றையெல்லாம் எங்களுடைய சாரதியின் சாதுரியம் காரணமாக நாங்கள் தவறிச் சென்ற பொழுது 3 மீது தொடர்ந்து கைத்துப்பாக்கிகளால் சுட்டபடி கலைத்து வந்தார்கள். எங்கு பார்த்தாலும் மக்கள் எங்கு சென்றாலும் ராணுவ பதிவுகள், ராணுவ காவலர்கள், ராணுவ கெடுபிடிகள், இந்த நிலைகளில் மக்கள் வாழுகிற பொழுது இந்த பிரச்சனைகளை நாங்கள் வெளியுலகத்துக்கு கொண்டு வருவதை தடுப்பதற்காக அவர்கள் இன்னும் சரியான ஒரு வாழ்க்கை முறையை அனுபவிக்கவில்லை. அவருடைய வீதிகளை பாருங்கள், அவருடைய வீடுகளை பாருங்கள், அவருடைய இழந்து குடும்பங்கள் எத்தனை ஆயிரத்துக்கும் மேற்பட்டவர்கள் இழந்திருக்கிறார்கள், எவ்வளவு பேர் சிறைகளிலே இருக்கிறார்கள்.
And that's true of Santiago. When his day of release finally arrives, he faces an uncertain future. His family is there to greet him. Sudantarana Singh, the brigadier in charge of rehabilitation, has some final words of encouragement for the 106 former Tamil Tigers. But after the ceremony, the brigadier is besieged by a group of Tamil women. Out of 11,000 cadres arrested, just under half are still in rehabilitation, and these women want their relatives released too.
Request for release of my husband. I have, I think, over 5,000 letters of this nature.
So basically this lady is saying that her husband was forced to join the LTT when he was very young, so he shouldn't be condemned for it.
Nobody is condemned. Nobody is condemned. These people are given a second chance for their life. History is forgotten. Let's bury it. Let's start fresh.
But for the Tamils, making a fresh start may not be so easy.
இப்போ கேட்குறோம் திருப்பியும் தமிழர் ஆயுதம் ஏந்தி வீணமா, அது எனக்கு சொல்ல தெரியல. ஆனால் எந்த பிள்ளை மறக்க மாட்டான்னு தான் நான் நினைக்கிறேன். எந்த பிள்ளைன்னு நான் சொல்கிறேன், இதை மாதிரி அங்கே 1000 பிள்ளைகள் இருக்கலாம், லட்சம் இருக்கலாம், அவைகள் மறக்க மாட்டேன்னு நான் நினைக்கிறேன்.
Can you have national unity without reconciliation? Can you have reconciliation without accountability? You know, we may never get justice in terms of what has happened in this country, but we will get the truth, so that if we are to forge ahead into the future, we'll have a good idea as to where we're starting from.
Santiago gets his reintegration certificate and heads off to start his new life. Time will tell how easy or not it is for his country to do the same.
That's all for this edition of People and Power. If you'd like to comment on our film or any other matter, we'd love to hear from you on aljazeera.net/English. Until next time, bye-bye.